How's it going, y'all? So I wanted to have a little talk about if you're a beginner, what should you learn or when should you learn certain things? Okay, so one thing I've noticed is I think a lot of people jump into tooling and they don't really understand why that tooling should be used or what its purpose is, right? And my talk or my argument is you need to know why you're using something before you just blindly start using it, which is also why I suggest you start learning with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Just use vanilla JavaScript to build out a really basic application before you jump into React. Now, the reason I recommend that is because when you start building an application with vanilla JavaScript, you're going to realize how tedious it is to manage all these DOM elements, create them, put them on the page. Whenever a user types into something or tries to update something, you have to go find that DOM element by hand, manually like search through it and then update it. You're doing a lot of lower level like styling, like you get the DOM element, you do like dot styles and then the style name and you set it. So it just gets really bloated and really hard to manage when you do vanilla JavaScript. And you have to be really, really meticulous and organized to be able to handle a large scale JavaScript project. And you don't see that for yourself until you start building out something like for yourself, right? You could listen to people online and say, oh, vanilla JavaScript becomes unmanageable. But until you actually build it and see it firsthand, you start realizing why everyone uses a framework like React, Vue, Svelte, Angular. These frameworks kind of mitigate the need to do any DOM manipulation, which ends up becoming a huge time saver because now you're not worrying about how do you like actually update these things on the page. You're more worried about linking these things to data. And when the data updates, you know your DOM element's going to update as well. So it's good to like try to build something small with vanilla JavaScript and just understand. And when you reach that point where you're like, dude, this is really tedious, that's when it's time to go learn React. And also like you need to be decently good at JavaScript before you jump into React. I think I mentioned this multiple times in the past, but React can get pretty complex pretty quick, right? There's a lot of stuff going on that if you don't have a solid foundation in JavaScript, you're just going to sit here twiddling your thumbs trying to understand how to do stuff in React. And this same argument applies to everything, right? So at some point when you're using React, you're going to have to start sharing state in between components, and you might do state lifting, you might do prop drilling. And when you have one parent component that has to pass state 2 or 3 levels down into a child component just to be able to show something simple, you start realizing, wow, this is actually a huge pain in the butt to build an application and share state. So that's when people start realizing, hey, we need a better way to manage state. I'm just showing Redux. I don't use Redux. I don't like Redux, but this is just the de facto standard in some cases. But that's when you realize, okay, there's something called state management libraries, and they're built to take care of like handling that problem. Okay, so don't start using Redux until you understand the problem it's trying to solve, because if you don't understand its purpose, you start using it incorrectly and you just start throwing everything into your application state, which in a sense, application state is like a global variable you just throw things on. And stuff can get out of hand really quick if you don't really understand what you should be storing there and why you should be storing it there. And like read through the best practices, which is like 1,000 paragraphs explaining how to do this properly, which that's a red flag. If there's that many best practices for Redux, maybe you should not be using it. I don't know, use like Dustan or something simple, or use React context, right? There's actually something built into React where you can kind of share state between components. It might not be the fastest or more performant, but let's be honest, we're not building like the next 3D Crisis, right? We're not building like Half-Life 3. We're just building a freaking UI that has a form and submit some data to a backend. The performance is not like this huge selling point, honestly, in my opinion. And then even like for CSS, there's something called TailwindCSS. Before you just blindly start using TailwindCSS, build some things with CSS. Understand why CSS can become really unmanageable. How the cascading style sheet could be a detriment instead of a benefit, right? You have these style sheets that are loaded in a particular order. If you change the ordering of those, that can break your entire application because some styles are overriding other styles. And then you have to follow practices in CSS called like BIM, so that you don't potentially mess up your styling and make it more like modular. So build some stuff with just vanilla CSS. Realize how tedious and difficult it is to build a large-scale UI using these tools, and then branch out and be like, okay, this is why people use Tailwind. This is why people use libraries like Bootstrap, right? Because styling and doing layout and making this mobile friendly and responsive is actually really, really tedious and hard with like media queries. So we use libraries that have all these helpers built into them that we can just use to kind of do what we want. Now, I don't really have a preference on if it's Tailwind or Bootstrap or there's some other ones out there. Just pick one and get good at it. Honestly, like they all do the same stuff. They all provide the same helper functions. You can even use like a component library like Bootstrap components, or I don't know what the other ones are. I'm not good with CSS. I don't really know all these. But again, the point I'm making is like understand why people in the industry are moving towards these technologies. And the main thing is it just makes life easier, and it also makes projects more standard, right? If I go from one company that's using React to another company that's using React, for the most part, I can kind of jump on board and understand what's going on. If I go from one company that's using vanilla JavaScript to another company that's using vanilla JavaScript, there's a high chance that these companies are doing stuff completely different, and it's going to be very, very hard to understand the different code bases and onboard. That's why Angular JS or Angular, whatever version they're on now, I think is really great for enterprise because most Angular applications use the exact same stuff versus React. It's not really opinionated, so you might jump from one project to the next. They're using a different form of state management. One might be using a React query, one might be using RTK query. It's just kind of not as consistent. Vue is beautiful in that way because everyone has like the same, well, I shouldn't say everyone has the same approach in Vue, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say, right? Let me just conclude with learn why we use these tools, understand the purpose of these tools, really feel the pain of not using these tools by building out applications using vanilla JavaScript, vanilla CSS, and start seeing for yourself how much extra work goes into building a site when you don't use a existing library or framework, right? Someone out there has already built these libraries and invested tons of time in testing to make sure these libraries are solid. And as you become more senior and you become a better developer, you start knowing that you need to utilize these third-party libraries if you want to be productive in any way whatsoever, right? There's some people out there who are really good at just building out UIs with vanilla CSS. But for the most part, productivity and churning out features as fast as possible is the key, especially when we're in this business. So learning how to use these libraries becomes critical. Anyway, I hope you guys like my little rant and my talk. Have a good day. Happy coding.